Thank you, Simply Safe, for sponsoring today's episode. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. Today, we are continuing the case of the death of a 12-year-old boy at the Trails, Carolina Wilderness Camp on February 3rd, 2024. Now, this camp is part of what's known as the troubled teen industry, a place that parents send their children who have behavioral or psychological issues, and these places are supposed to provide counseling, guidance, and rehabilitation so that the child can go on to lead a productive life after working through their problems. But the entire concept of the troubled teen industry is very controversial, and many believe that these facilities prey on desperate parents, that they care more about money than people, and end up doing more harm than good. Initially, the death of the 12-year-old boy was seen as suspicious by local law enforcement, and an autopsy was performed on February 6th. The medical examiner decided that the death appeared to not be natural, but for a while, the cause and the manner of the death were still pending. However, Trails Carolina made a point of getting ahead of the narrative, claiming that they had conducted an internal investigation which revealed that there was no evidence their facility had caused harm or that the conditions at Trails were unsafe or unhealthy. However, a report from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services would put Trails Carolina's claims under question. And when the autopsy results finally came back, it would be revealed that there was more to the death than met the eye. We go over a lot of information in part one, so if you haven't seen that video yet, go ahead and watch it now. I'll link it in the description box because a lot of this won't make sense without the context of that video. But before we dive in today, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video. We are all watchers and learners in the true crime world, and so we're all aware of how important safety is. And recently, I have been beefing up the security at my home for peace of mind and to protect myself and my family against every potential threat. Some may call it paranoid, but I call it smart. And if it helps me sleep better at night, it's worth it. At Simply Safe, safety is the only thing that matters. Simply Safe's award-winning security system is designed with cutting-edge technology and powered by 24/7 professional monitoring for fast emergency response when customers need it the most. And with Fast Protect monitoring and live guard protection, Simply Safe agents act within 5 seconds of getting an alarm signal, whether you're home or away. The agents at Simply Safe can actually see and speak to intruders in real time, and with their eyes on the scene, they can confirm the emergency and communicate important details and critical information to 911 and first responders. Simply Safe also has a ton of equipment that you can use to build the perfect home security system that fits the needs of your house and your family. For instance, I have 2 keypads. One is in the main area of the home and one's in my bedroom. I also have 2 panic buttons. One is for by my bed and one is for upstairs, so we'll be able to call for help no matter where in the house we are. I have a doorbell camera that conveniently shows me who's at my door. It's got a really nice wide lens so you can see a lot. And then I can see this through the app on my phone, so I can also speak to whoever's at my door through the app as well, and I don't even have to be home to do this. I have motion detectors in various rooms that are going to alert me if there's movement in the house when I'm home or away, movement that shouldn't be there, obviously. I also have interior and exterior cameras so that every angle of my home is monitored and nothing can happen without me knowing about it. And the best part is, unlike many traditional home security systems, you'll never be locked into a long-term contract. I don't want to say who I signed up with years ago. And they locked me into a contract that not only was I paying every month for the service, but I was paying every month for the equipment. I really didn't know what I was signing. I really didn't understand what was happening. I was just so insistent on having some security and some safety that I kind of just signed something thinking that everything was going to go all right, and it didn't go all right, and it was a pain. It was a pain and a horrible experience to get through and then to try to get out of. But Simply Safe doesn't do that. They earn your business day by day by keeping you safe and satisfied, not locking you in, not trapping you. You can cancel your service at any time, and pricing is very transparent and affordable at less than $1 a day with no hidden fees ever. That's less than half the cost of traditional security systems. Also, Simply Safe equipment is easy to install and activate it. I did a lot of it myself in less than an hour, but if you don't have a lot of time or you just want to, have the setup checked off your to-do list, you can choose to add professional installation so that a pro can do it for you. And right now you can save 20% off your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for a Fast Protect monitoring plan, and you can get your first month free. All you have to do is visit simplysafe.com/stephanieharlowe to customize yours. They have all sorts of things, not just cameras, not just motion detectors. They have fire alarms, things like that. They also have glass break alarms so that you'll know if somebody breaks a window. They have everything to keep you covered. There is no safe like Simply Safe. And remember, all you have to do, simplysafe.com/stephanieharlowe, so you can customize yours and get 20% off your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for a Fast Protect monitoring plan. Thank you so much to Simply Safe for sponsoring today's video and also for keeping myself, my home, and my family safe. And now let's dive in. We spent a good deal of the last video talking about what Trails Carolina is, where it's located, and sort of what kind of day-to-day life campers or clients would have there. We also talked about testimonials and statements from multiple people who spent time there, either as patients or employees, and we discussed a few lawsuits that were brought against the facility by previous campers and their parents. Essentially, Trails Carolina does not have a squeaky clean record, far from it, and the death of a client who had been at the camp for less than 24 hours would become the straw that broke the camel's back. We also talked about the Bivy bag contraption that the boy, Clark Harmon, had been put to sleep in on the night of February 2nd, and how Trails Carolina used the bag as well as other forms of restraints with their juvenile clients on a regular basis. Although the state of North Carolina has nearly 4,000 licensed mental health facilities, Trails Carolina is one of only 2 residential therapy camps in the state that is licensed through the Department of Health and Human Services. And that means the facility would have to meet certain standards, and those standards would need to be in place whenever the state inspected the facility. Standards such as having an adequate staff-to-client ratio to ensure the health and safety of clients. This staff would need to be trained and have experience with the specific set of issues the clients would have and knowledge about mental illness and psychotropic medications and their side effects. The facility should have the ability to bring in additional staff to provide more intensive treatment and support in response to the needs of individual clients. The treatment of each client should be under the supervision of a physician who would be on call 24 hours a day. The staff should also be knowledgeable about the nature of addiction and recovery and withdrawal symptoms, as well as the treatment and methodologies for adults and children in crisis. Now, that's obviously a huge oversimplification about the standards and policies needed to be in place for licensing through the state. It's quite extensive in reality, and we're going to get a bit more specific about certain points throughout this video. But right now, what you need to know is that Trails Carolina was licensed through the state of North Carolina, even though they'd been cited and fined for multiple violations in the past. The Department of Health and Human Services has a record of 5 statements of deficiency for Trails Carolina in the past 5 years, and an inspection last year found that children had attempted to flee or walk away from the facility without permission at least 21 times from March to June of 2023. That March to June of 2023, that's just a handful of months. And following 20 of these incidents, the juveniles were restrained anywhere from 10 seconds to 15 minutes. The Department of Health and Human Services went to the camp again following the death of Clark Harmon, and social workers were on site on February 4th, but they were prevented access to the remaining juvenile clients until February 6th. On February 16th, the department announced that the 18 remaining juveniles at Trails were being removed, saying in a letter to Trails Carolina, quote, "It was determined that action needed to be taken to ensure the health and safety of the children. Parents have been notified, and children will be temporarily taken into the care of the Transylvania County DSS. The Secretary has determined that the character and degree of conditions at Trails Carolina are detrimental to the health or safety of the children in your care." End quote. At the end of March 2024, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services announced that they intended to revoke Trails Carolina's license after a survey of the facility was conducted on March 21st.
The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services sent a series of letters to the leadership at Trails Carolina today, effectively shutting the camp down. This move comes after years of scrutiny, as I've talked to more than a half dozen former participants at the camp who've detailed allegations of abuse and neglect, and I've also pushed regulators on their previous lax oversight of the camp. Specifically, today's letters from NCDHHS say the agency intends to revoke Trails Carolina's license and has further suspended the camp's ability to admit new campers. The letters from NCDHHS say the moves come after a new inspection of the camp conducted last week found more violations, including violations of medication requirements, incident response requirements, and failing to protect from harm, abuse, neglect, or exploitation. A 12-year-old boy died at the camp on February 3rd. He was found stiff and cold to the touch by the time first responders arrived. Detectives are investigating the death as a potential crime. The camp has been temporarily shut down since February 16th. Even with today's new developments, I'm continuing to push for answers, including why regulators had previously failed to inspect the camp every year as required by law, also continuing to dig for new information on the criminal investigation being conducted by the Transylvania County Sheriff's Office.
The department fined Trails Carolina $18,000 for these violations and told them that they had 60 days to pay before a 10% penalty plus interest was added. The camp was also instructed to provide a plan of correction for the deficiencies cited. And at first, we didn't have much information about what exactly DHHS had found at Trails that led to the violations. But in April, an 88-page report was released with a plethora of new details. The survey conducted by the DHHS consisted of 10 current clients, 9 former clients, and 1 deceased client, and that would be 12-year-old Clark Harmon. So not only did we get information about the policies and procedures of Trails Carolina in general, but we got more information about the timeline of events leading up to Clark's death, including interviews with the staff members who were responsible for him at the time. We're going to start more generally and then finally narrow it down to the issues that affected Clark specifically. But first, let's talk about medication requirements, which we did touch on a bit in part 1. At any licensed facility, prescription or non-prescription drugs should only be administered to a client on the written order of a person authorized to prescribe drugs and medications, including injections. And they should only be administered by a licensed person or by an unlicensed person who's been trained by a registered nurse, a pharmacist, or another legally qualified person. A medication administration record, otherwise known as a MAR, should be kept for each client. And in that MAR, all drugs given to a client should be recorded directly after administration. The MARs are supposed to include the client's name, the name, strength, and quantity of the drug, instructions for how to administer the drug, the name or initials of the person giving the drug, and any client requests for changes of medication. The DHHS report stated that this rule was not met at Trails Carolina based on record reviews, observation, and interviews, and that the facility had failed to ensure that medications were given on the written order of a physician, which affected 8 out of the 10 current clients audited and 8 out of 9 of the former clients audited. Trails Carolina also failed to keep MARs current for 8 of the 10 current clients and 8 of the 9 former clients. The report stated, quote, numerous medications were administered to clients without physician orders, and other medications were not administered as prescribed. MARs were not documented accurately to reflect the strength, quantity, frequency, and or instructions to administer the medications. There were 13 incident reports over a 3-month period, which had medications documented as missed or late due to lack of supply. Not all MARs matched the incident reports and indicated the medications had been administered. Multiple MARs were not provided for reviews as requested, end quote. So the report states things like 7 doses of redacted drug were administered without documentation of quantity, and 5 doses had no time, and 29 doses of redacted drug were initiated as administered without time, instructions for administering the medication, or physician's order. So basically, the facility is supposed to keep very detailed records, these MARs, of what kinds of medications the juvenile clients are receiving, when they're getting them, who's giving them to them, any side effects, just basically everything that happens and everything that can be observed needs to be documented in this, because we're talking about kids who are getting, sometimes very strong prescription medications. And we need to make sure that not only were these medications prescribed by a treating physician, but that the medications are being given correctly at the right time in the right dosage, etc. And according to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, this was not being done at Trails Carolina. The Health and Wellness Director at Trails wrote in a February 13th email, quote, I'm going to offer a narrative in an effort to provide context, although I realize little consideration is given to the background. Upon admission, client number 6's mother reported that client number 6 had not been taking his redacted for quite some time, and that she would like us to offer this medication as needed. The physician's signed over-the-counter document did not match the received order. We initially defaulted to the order, as is appropriate. However, the student reported side effects and was resistant to taking the medication, even on one occasion cheeking and hiding the capsules. We followed up with the parents, who put in writing to please offer the medication as needed and that they would send us the corrected order. When the order was received, it still stated daily. We followed up with the family and the prescriber on multiple occasions, receiving no response. The family has now agreed to an appointment with our consulting psychiatrist, which is currently scheduled for redacted, and we are seeking an earlier appointment to rectify our records as quickly as possible. While I do understand that errors were made, I also think it's important to consider the timeline of events." End quote. An interview with the same person revealed that Trails Carolina only had 2 health and wellness staff at the facility, and they were responsible for making sure required documentation was completed upon admission. They would also be responsible for tracking down meds, communicating with prescribers and parents, and coordinating physicians' orders with the local pharmacy. The health and wellness director said, quote, "I am a wilderness EMT for this role. My background does not have much to do with this role. I am a wilderness therapy kid and came back to do this role." End quote. In an interview with a Trails Carolina staff member, the DHHS was told that Trails did have an issue of not having enough medication from time to time, and that is why they would count the pills and notify health and wellness, who would then call the pharmacy. The health and wellness director stated, quote, "Nothing is streamlined because of our transitional model. We have a lot of records." End quote. This person also stated that the facility had a consulting physician and psychiatrist, and the physician would come to the camp quarterly to provide training to the staff. When asked about the multiple incident reports that mentioned a compromised medication supply, the director said that some parents will send the meds in with their child upon admission, and a 30-day supply of meds is requested at admission, but the parents are encouraged to use the pharmacy that's local to Trails Carolina, and if the parents decide to use this pharmacy, the facility has to wait for them to send it. The MARS would be created from the medication sent at admission and created on the client's first day at Trails. A second audit would be done by a different staff member, and if staff ordered over-the-counter medication, and then it would be signed on the MAR. The director said that they would review the MARs against records when the clients first came in, and then any time they were updated or when an audit was happening, but there was not a set schedule to review them. It wasn't like they were reviewed on a daily or weekly basis. And if there was a discrepancy between the MARs and the orders, Trails would follow the doctor's orders, and medication errors from the previous week would be discussed every Monday during an operations meeting that included managers from all departments as well as the executive director. The health and wellness director said that admittedly, the staff were not putting dosage on the MARs or following dosage on the package, but, quote, "Trails is the team. Everyone is responsible. Our biggest issue is helping families in crisis, so the kids are coming in fast. So trying to get information on the front end, wish that could be better. In a perfect world, we would have all the scripts in hand prior to a kid arriving. I think we do the best with what we have." End quote. The DHHS went into the health and wellness medication locked storage room on February 12th and witnessed 4 large stacks of numerous loose papers, which ended up being MARs that hadn't been completed or filed. The executive director of Trails Carolina was also interviewed, and they said that they couldn't speak specifically about the medication errors related to the lack of supply, but he said, quote, "Sometimes insurance or parents have been uncooperative. Trying to get the outside source for medications is difficult. It's not uncommon for us to have that issue." End quote. He also mentioned that asking the clients to come in with a 30-day supply of their own prescribed medication doesn't always happen, and that it was strangely not uncommon for parents to be unresponsive to emails or phone calls. The medical examiner that did Clark Harmon's autopsy, they reviewed the medication bottles and drug count for Clark, and the report claims that Clark had been prescribed clonidine and 2 bottles of redacted had been filled on redacted, but the medication count was off. Apparently, there were 3 clonidine pills missing. Now, clonidine is approved to treat high blood pressure in adults, but it is prescribed for other uses in adolescents and children. A long-acting clonidine has been approved for treating ADHD. It's supposed to reduce symptoms like hyperactivity and impulsive behavior. It can also be used to treat tic disorders, anxiety disorders, and sleep difficulties. Where did those 3 clonidine pills go? Considering that Clark had only been at Trails Carolina for like a day, where did those 3 pills go? I don't know. So the next issue was patients' rights in a 24-hour facility. Each minor client who's receiving treatment from a 24-hour facility has the right to communicate and consult with their parents or guardians, along with any medical professionals that are treating them at the time. They also have the right to make and receive phone calls, send and receive mail, and keep and use personal clothing and possessions, among many other rights. The report states that no right may be restricted or limited except by the qualified professional who's responsible for the client's treatment plan. And in that case, a written statement should be put into the client's record, which details reasons for any restrictions of those rights. Additionally, a restriction is not to exceed 30 days, and an evaluation of each restriction should be done by a qualified professional every 7 days. So let's say a restriction is this person is kind of acting a little violent, so we're going to put them in a place by themselves. We're going to isolate them from the other kids. That can't be done for more than 30 days, and every week, the restriction that this client is under, this juvenile client is under, it needs to be reviewed to make sure that there's still a reason for it to be in place. Now, the Department of Health and Human Services stated that Trails Carolina had not followed these rules, and they had failed to ensure that each minor client retained the right to communicate and consult with their parent or guardian or make and receive phone calls. But even from Trails Carolina's publicly available documentation, they didn't make it super easy for parents and children to communicate with each other. The Family Services Handbook FAQ section says, quote, "Traditional mail and email are the primary ways that you communicate with your child. Most parents type their weekly letter and email them to your Trails primary therapist. You can send an email letter to your son or daughter by sending it to your child's primary therapist's email address with the following subject line, letter for child's name. The primary therapist will deliver mail during their weekly sessions. Therefore, to ensure that they receive a letter for the week, it must be in the primary therapist's inbox or mailbox no later than Sunday evening. Staff and therapists collect the students' letters on Wednesday evening and post them on the electronic system for parents by 5 p.m. on Friday of that week. In order to encourage accountability, minimize disruptions, and model limits and boundaries for students, letters are distributed and collected only once a week. All incoming mail will be screened prior to delivery to your child. Emails and handwritten letters will be screened to ensure that appropriate information gets passed on to your child. Envelopes will be checked for personal belongings and contraband. Letters that your child writes to you will also be read but never altered in any way." End quote. So, Trails Carolina decides what is appropriate for parents to tell their own children? Now, this might be because it seems that when a parent decides to send their kids to this camp, they're in a way essentially relinquishing control of their child for the duration of their stay. The facility's parent authorization and consent form states, quote, "Inasmuch as I have enrolled my son/daughter in the Trails Carolina Adolescent Program, and realizing that Trails has exclusive control of my child during this time, I approve and consent to the following safety procedures to ensure the well-being of all participants. Trails staff have my permission to review, return, and or restrict all incoming/outgoing mail to and from my child." End quote. I don't know if I would ever feel comfortable signing anything that gave anyone, quote unquote, exclusive control of my own child and allowed them to restrict information exchanged between myself and my child. It just seems like a very dangerous and slippery slope to put a vulnerable minor into. And in that document that the parent signed, it states that they're giving the facility permission to review, return, or restrict any incoming and outgoing mail. But in the Trails Carolina student grievance policy, it says, quote, "Incoming and outgoing mail will not be censored or restricted. This includes mail to and from parents, attorneys, and guardians. Incoming mail will be reviewed by staff and sent to the recipient without alteration." End quote. The policy also states that the kids have the right to request phone calls with their parents. The guardian of a current juvenile client told the Department of Health and Human Services that their child was only able to speak to his parents when he was with his therapist. And the parents of another client said that the calls were not private because their child's therapist was always with him when the calls were happening. The parents of a former client stated, quote, "There is no correspondence. In means of talking to him, it was like 2 weeks. The only time I could talk to him was with the clinical director on the phone. We didn't have access to communicate with him while he was there." End quote. Now let's talk about this in regards to Clark. The report states that an attempt to interview Clark's parents on February 20th was unsuccessful due to no response to requests for a return call, which is interesting. Clark Harmon's parents don't really want to talk to the Department of Health and Human Services. They don't really want to talk to the people who are investigating their son's death. On February 15th, the logistics coordinator was interviewed and stated that Clark had demanded to call his mother on February 2nd when he arrived, but, quote, "In our program, the clients are not to contact their family at that time. I don't have the authority to say yes or no. I wanted to say, yeah, here's my phone," end quote. The executive director of Trails Carolina said that on the first day of admission, calls were not usually allowed because, quote, "We will have that conversation and half the time parents bring them in and it's like you saw them 5 minutes ago. So no," end quote. But as we know, this was not the situation with Clark Harmon. He was a 12-year-old boy who was snatched from his home in the middle of the night by strangers and brought to a place he did not consent to go to, states away. And he wanted to call his mother. I'm not sure how withholding that small slice of comfort from a confused and disoriented child who's already struggling with mental health issues is going to be productive or helpful. Now, the founder and executive director also said that if clients wanted to contact their parents, they would have to go through the grievance process, and the parents have to agree because, quote, "We're not going to surprise a parent with a call," end quote. Imagine saying that with a straight face. Imagine saying that and believing what you're saying is valid. We're not going to surprise parents with a phone call from their child, their minor child, that they sent to this troubled teen camp. And we don't want these kids to surprise their own parents with a call. Even if these kids want to talk to their parents for some comfort, even if these kids want to talk to their parents to just make sure, they still love them, right? Because these are children and their brains are still developing. Their neural connections are connecting and basically setting the framework for how they're going to interact with people throughout their lives, what their interpersonal relationships are going to look like throughout their lives. And a kid who gets sent away in the middle of the night to some, troubled teen camp where they're basically stripped of their clothes and personal belongings and handed a jail uniform of sorts and kept restricted from reaching out to friends, family, and support systems. A child like that might want a little reassurance that their parents didn't send them there because they don't love them anymore, that their parents didn't send them there because they're bad or naughty or trouble. They might want some reassurance like why they're there. They might want to hear their parents say, "I love you, I support you, I'm doing this because I think and I hope it will help you and help us have a better relationship." They just might want some, validation, some comfort. And I don't understand how this dude, the executive director, can say with a straight face like, "Oh, we're not going to surprise these parents with a phone call from their child." This is such bullshit. I'm disgusted. And you can see the lack of self-awareness in a lot of these upper management people. It seems like they don't even know what the hell happens at Trails Carolina, to be honest. These next violations are going to pertain more to Clark Harmon. The DHHS report found that Trails Carolina failed to issue written preliminary findings within 5 working days of a Level 3 incident, and this Level 3 incident would be Clark's death. The North Carolina Incident Response Improvement System, or IRIS, is the Department of Health and Human Services web-based system that's used for reporting and documenting responses to Level 2 and Level 3 incidents, which would be any incidents not consistent with the routine operation of a facility that's likely to lead to adverse effects upon the client. So the report is supposed to include a description of what happened and how the staff responded. It's also supposed to describe the cause of an incident, including the sequence of events leading up to the incident, as well as individual factors, triggers, and systemic issues. So issues with the facility that may have contributed to that kind of incident, that bad incident happening. Now, remember that Trails Carolina has claimed to have conducted an internal investigation into Clark's death, but DHHS made requests for the results of this internal investigation on February 7th, February 9th, and February 20th. No reports were provided. The director of operations claimed that she didn't know if an internal investigation had been done following Clark's death, and she would have to check with the executive director, and she hadn't even been at the facility on February 3rd, but she'd found out about what happened to Clark at around 3 p.m. that day. The executive director claimed that an internal investigation into Clark's death had started on February 4th, and an attorney from a nearby city had conducted it, but at the time of her interview, the executive director was not sure if the investigation was still going on, and her interview happened on February 21st. So... And according to Trails Carolina spokesperson, the internal investigation would have already been wrapped up by February 21st because they claimed to know that their facility was not at fault at all for what had happened to Clark. So the DHHS report goes on to talk about how law enforcement began an investigation, which included interviews with staff who were in contact with Clark Harmon upon his arrival at Trails Carolina. The report doesn't use these staff members' names. They only refer to them by their title and a number. So we have lead staff number 1, staff number 3, staff number 4, and the field shift coordinator, or the FSC. The report found that these 4 individuals failed to protect Clark Harmon from harm, and they neglected him. Staff number 3 was responsible for performing night checks on the clients in cabin 6. Staff number 4 was responsible for sleeping next to Clark Harmon the night of February 2nd, and the FSC and lead staff number 1 worked in cabin 6 that night as well, with lead staff number 1 being responsible for administering medications. Reportedly, because it was Clark's first night at Trails Carolina, he was placed on something called assigned proximity, AP, or safety. They all mean the same thing, and essentially, allegedly, it's a precaution that's taken to keep the student safe from themselves and to keep other students safe from this specific student who just arrived. Now, the staff in Clark's cabin that night made it seem like this was just standard procedure, that all students were put on AP their first night. But according to the Trails Carolina policy on safety levels, a student is placed on AP when they violate safety code. And when a student is placed on AP, there's automatic requirements that are put into place. One being that the student needs to be within arm's reach of a staff member at all times. And at night, the student will be required to sleep in a burrito unless an exception is approved by the clinical or executive directors. The executive director of Trails told the Department of Health and Human Services that they'd started using the Bivy bag system instead of the burrito system the prior fall. And they said that other wilderness programs also used this Bivy bag system, and they felt that it gave a better sense of privacy and was easier to digest for the clients than the burrito. The facility's internal procedure for increased sleeping precaution says that the Bivy was the default option, and that a sleeping tarp was only to be used in specific instances and if approved by the client's primary therapist or a director. And there's directions for how to introduce the kids to this Bivy bag. The handbook tells staff to approach the Bivy in a gentle way and make it clear that the bag was to ensure the student's safety and that they could get out whenever they felt they needed to. They would just have to tell the staff. The handbook says, quote, hear their concerns and validate any fears, frustrations, or emotions coming up, end quote. Now, before the student gets into the Bivy, a pocket check must be performed, and only things that are necessary for sleeping are allowed into the bag with the student. These items would be a sleeping pad, a sleeping bag, and no more than 2 layers of clothing, along with 1 clothing item to be used as a pillow and a stuffed animal, if approved by a therapist, because God forbid these kids should be allowed a stuffed animal unless somebody that they have never even met yet, because it's their first night there, decides that they can have a stuffed animal to bring them comfort. So the sleeping pad would be set up inside the Bivy bag, and then that Bivy would need to be placed inside of a canoe, basically a tarp, and then the walls of the tarp would be pulled up and wrapped around the sides of the Bivy bag. The Bivy must have the screen closed at the head so that the staff would be able to see the student if they needed to. A zipper alarm system would also be used once the student fell asleep, but until they're asleep, the student is allowed to be inside the Bivy bag without the alarm as long as a staff member is next to them. Now, reportedly, the staff tries to make sure that the student doesn't see them attach to the alarm, and that's why they wait until the student is asleep, because they don't want the kids to know that there's an alarm that will go off if they try to get out of the bag. The pin of the alarm must be attached to the top zipper of the screen with a small zip tie through the metal on both parts. The key ring on the alarm then goes around the pole, and the pole is secured in place with a Velcro tab. Additionally, bells must also be attached to the bottom of the Bivy bag and the Velcro tab where the pole is secured. So basically, like, these kids can't even move in this bag without some sound being made. Attachments between the alarm and the bivy bag or the bells must utilize a small zip tie to ensure that the system is secure, but can also be removed by the staff if needed. Once the student is secured inside the bivy bag and the canoe, a staff member must sleep head to head next to the student, and there either has to be another staff member lying sideways at the head of the bivy, or the student needs to be placed in the corner of the cabin with their head and one side against a wall. And basically this is to sandwich them in so this kid cannot get out of the bag without someone knowing. Now, interviews with current and past clients of Trails Carolina revealed that many of them were familiar with the bivy bag. One juvenile client said that if you are on safety, you sleep in a bivy on the floor of the cabin, and the alarm on the bivy will make a chirping noise if it's unclipped. You have to ask a staff member to get out. Another client stated that to get out of the bivy, you have to tap the staff member somehow, and it's hard to do so because you're wrapped up in a freaking bag, and basically you have to roll on the staff member in order to get their attention. Now remember that the executive director had claimed they'd switched from the burrito to the bivy bag the prior fall. One of the staff members who was assigned to Clark's cabin would tell law enforcement that the bivy was intended to keep the clients safe and to basically make sure that they couldn't get out without alerting staff, and this was supposed to reduce the risk of self-harm or attempts to run away. When asked what the protocol was for a student experiencing claustrophobia, which I feel like anybody would in these situations, in this scenario, especially a kid, the staff member responded, quote, "None that I've been trained on. There is an alternative to the bivy, the burrito. It's more claustrophobic," end quote. This person went on to say that the burrito seemed more constrictive and inhumane, and the bivy was supposed to be more comfortable than wrapping someone in a tarp, but, quote, "I absolutely agree with that," when asked if the bivy was traumatic to these kids. The staff member said, quote, "That precaution is more to prevent harm than encourage therapy. That is why we have to go to the therapists if we're going to take them off," end quote. And the staff member, once again, they're saying this in reference to putting a new client on this AP or safety and forcing these restrictive sleeping measures on them. Another staff member in Clark's cabin said that the goal was to sandwich clients in and be as close as possible to the point where they could not even roll over without the staff member next to them knowing, and that staff member should be able to reach out of their sleeping bag and touch the client. So the cabin that Clark was assigned to was cabin 6, and it's a wooden cabin with a covered front porch area, a plywood floor, and a plywood front door. Inside there were 5 bunk beds with green mattresses, 2 on the left that were parallel with the main wall, and 3 that were placed in a T-shape from the other wall. On the left side of the cabin, 6 windows were found boarded up, and the executive director claimed this was done for privacy due to the close proximity of another cabin. There was also a bathroom in the back of the cabin to the right that included 2 toilets, a sink, and a stand-up shower. Inside, on the floor of the cabin, was the bivy bag that Clark had been put to sleep in on the evening of February 2nd. It's described as greenish brown and black, made of nylon-type material in the shape of a long tube with an opening at the front like a mouth that allows a pole to be inserted to create a half-moon shape for headspace or gear space. The bottom part of the bivy was a nylon-type material that appeared to be covered up with a waterproofing substance that came up on the sides. The opening of the bivy had 2 different portions that could be zippered up to close it. The first zippered part was made of a fine black mesh net material over the opening, and this would allow for breathability and visibility, so whoever's inside can breathe and whoever's outside can see in. According to the police report, this first mesh layer had a hole in it that was bigger than the size of a fist, and the hole started from the seam of the zipper. The outside layer was white plastic with black ties at both ends resembling the shape of a canoe, and a golf ball-sized alarm was zip-tied to the metal zipper of this layer with a black hair tie and another zip tie. So I actually looked up the specific model of bivy bag online. And just going through the pictures of it, I felt claustrophobic. It looks like a coffin. In fact, the design type is referred to as mummy, a mummy design type. And as an adult, I would fight every single one of those staff members off like a honey badger before I let them put me in that thing. I promise you that, okay? I would go down fighting. As a child, I can't even imagine the powerlessness I would feel when I was told I had no choice but to sleep inside of it for an entire night. But this isn't even the end of the whole bivy setup, because once the kid's inside the bag, the bivy must then be placed into this plastic tarp, and then the tarp is raised up and wrapped around the bivy bag like a canoe, or that's what it looks like. It looks like the shape of a canoe. Current clients of Trails Carolina spoke about their experiences with the bivy bag sleeping arrangement, and they said that when in the bivy, you would sleep on the floor, and if you wanted to get up or go to the bathroom, you'd have to wake up the staff member that's sleeping next to you. And one juvenile client said, quote, "If you need help with the bivy, you need to tap the staff or roll on top of them. It's really hard to wake staff up." End quote. If a student unclipped the alarm or tried to get out of the bag with the alarm fastened, the alarm would make a loud noise. Now remember that the police report mentioned some damage to the bivy bag that Clark had been sleeping in. Remember that because we're going to come back to it. Now, the field shift coordinator that day claimed they did a cursory check of Clark during intake. This included pocket checks, make sure he doesn't have weapons, contraband, etc. And this was around 11:30 a.m. on February 2nd. At around 3 p.m., Clark was brought to join the other campers, and the field shift coordinator handed Clark's medications over to the lead staff number 1. The FSC also advised staff number 4 that Clark was on AP, or safety, and that this staff member was responsible for being within arm's reach of Clark at all times while AP lasted. Now, here's the thing about being placed on AP or safety at Trails Carolina. It's tough to know exactly what the protocol is for being classified under AP because interviews with both staff and upper management were inconsistent on several fronts, including the specifics of this. The manual claims that a client has to do something to make staff feel that they need extra protection, but many of the staff said that it was protocol for every new camper to be on AP their first night. A lot of clients and former clients said the same thing. Field staff members can move a client up to AP, but they can't move them down. They can't move them off of AP. They have to go through the client's primary therapist for that, and the therapist will then make the determination on whether or not the patient can be downgraded and taken off safety. A client is not supposed to be on safety for more than 72 hours, with the typical length of time being between 18 and 72 hours. But the DHHS investigation revealed that 11 clients had been placed on AP for longer than 72 hours. And this had actually happened to 2 clients more than once. One former client had endured it twice, and another former client had been subjected to AP for more than 72 hours 4 separate times. The field shift coordinator slept in cabin 6 that night, and at around 9 p.m. she told Clark that it was time to get into the bivy bag. Now, before I continue with this series of events, I want to tell you how Clark was found when first responders arrived the following morning at around 7:45 a.m. Clark was asleep on the floor of the cabin on a plastic sheet inside a sleeping bag and a bivy bag, but his body was turned around 180 degrees in the bag. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I believe that it means his head was located where his feet were supposed to be. And by the time the medical examiner arrived, Clark had been removed from the bivy bag, and the bag was crumpled up in the corner of the cabin. So I just assume in general that it means Clark wasn't found in the same position that he was put to sleep in. And we also know that his pants and underwear were removed and found by his head. But the field shift coordinator did have something to say about this during her interview with law enforcement. She said, quote, "Never seen a kid turn around in the bivy. I think if he did flip around in there, there'd be a lot of noise," end quote. So this person tells Clark at 9 p.m. it's time to get into the bivy and go to sleep. Now, according to the field shift coordinator, Clark started mumbling and making noises inside the bag, so they let him out. Basically, he was having a panic attack inside the bag, and they let him get out of the bag, and Clark fell asleep on the sleeping mat of staff number 4, the person who was responsible for sleeping next to him all night. Clark fell asleep on that guy's sleeping pad for a few minutes, but then they made him get back in the bag at 10 p.m., and they re-zipped him up and re-secured the alarm. Now, why am I saying that Clark had a panic attack and that's why they let him out of the bag for a few minutes? Well, a lot of the report is redacted, but I suspect there was an incident, possibly a panic or an anxiety attack incident. Clark had a history of anxiety, ADHD, and migraines, and with the stress of being abducted from his home by strangers and forcibly placed in some prison camp with more strangers who made him sleep in some coffin-like bag, I can't imagine that his anxiety wasn't absolutely skyrocketing. So the report doesn't say exactly what Clark did or said. I mean, it probably does, but we just can't see it. But the field shift coordinator stated, quote, "A lot of kids we have come in and will thrash and cry their first night. With behavioral stuff, we actively listen, validate, give options, and if that doesn't work, we disengage. And if it continues and it's unmanageable, we reach out to a therapist for further instruction," end quote. When the situation with Clark escalated, the field shift coordinator told staff number 4 to get up and stand against the wall. And after this, the staff member did not engage with Clark before he went back to bed. The field shift coordinator claims that after Clark went back into the bag around 10 p.m., she could hear him snoring, and so she went to bed for the night. She could not confirm whether or not Clark was breathing, talking, or making noises between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. because she was asleep. And because she was asleep, she also could not confirm whether or not staff member number 3 performed their night checks. Staff number 3's position was a wilderness field instructor who'd been working for Trails Carolina since November 15, 2023. Part of this person's job description was to perform night checks 3 times per night, once at midnight, once at 3 a.m., and once at 6 a.m. They were supposed to count all students during each night check, and they were instructed to look for hair on heads and breathing so that they could make sure there was a human inside the sleeping bags, not a stuffed sleeping bag. Now, if they can't tell for sure whether there's a person inside the sleeping bag, they were instructed to check by lightly lifting the sleeping bag to see if there was some weight in there. Staff member number 3 claimed that Clark was on safety that night, and so he was placed in the bivvy and would sleep next to staff number 4 on the floor in the corner of cabin 6 with his head towards the bunks, his feet against the wall, and the assigned staff member sleeping parallel on one side, head to head. Staff number 3 claimed that he or she had woken up to perform 3 night checks, just like they were supposed to, and then at 6 a.m., they thought that they heard shallow breathing coming from Clark's bivvy bag, but they couldn't determine whether the breathing was coming from Clark or the staff member sleeping next to him. They said that between the hours of 3 and 6, they went over to Clark's bivvy bag where they heard shallower breathing, but, quote, can't say for certain if the breathing was from him or staff number 4 because their heads were at the same level, end quote. This staff member also said that Clark's bivvy bag was fully enclosed, not just the breathable mesh layer, but the outer waterproof layer. And because of this, he could not physically see Clark. Staff number 3 admitted, quote, I didn't check as thoroughly as I should have, end quote. Now, here's the clincher with the bivvy bag that Clark was put to sleep in on the evening of February 2nd, 2024. It appears that it was damaged. Not only was there a hole in the mesh netting about the size of a fist that the police report talked about, but when they initially put Clark into the bag, there was an issue with one of the zippers. Although when asked about damage to the bivvy bag, the staff responses were once again inconsistent. Lead staff number 1 said that the bag was not damaged to their knowledge, stating, quote, I think the netting might have had a small tear. I didn't examine it, end quote. The field shift coordinator said that the zipper completely came off, and so she put it in her pocket. The screen part was where the zipper fell off, and because of that, the wind shell part of the bivvy bag, the plastic part, was zipped up. During the DHHS audit, lead staff number 1 stated that they always at least closed the mesh netting on the bivvy and that they had the ability to close the top layer if the client wanted it to be darker. But, quote, there's a mesh zipper and then one that is alarmed, hard shell cover. Most students don't like that. It makes you feel claustrophobic. I've never had a student want that. I have never had to open it. If I did, I would crack it just to point my light in there. I think the netting may have had a small tear in it. It was handed down from staff and wasn't told anything, and I didn't check, end quote. So remember we had talked about how Trails Carolina had previously used the burrito system for sleeping restrictions, and then at some point they'd switched to the bivvy bag? The executive director who oversaw day-to-day operations at Trails Carolina claimed that they'd switched to the bivvy bag the previous fall, and the executive director said that other wilderness camps also used the same bivvy bag system. Quote, I felt like it gave a better sense of privacy and easier to digest than the burrito for clients, end quote. The founder/executive director of Trails Carolina, who'd be the direct supervisor of the executive director, told the DHHS that he did not have firsthand knowledge of the bivvy bag system. Staff number 3, the person responsible for performing the night checks and making sure all clients were okay throughout the night, said they weren't sure how long new students were supposed to stay in the bivvy, and when they'd started working at Trails Carolina, the facility was switching over from the burrito to the bivvy. Staff training would be conducted by field management, and there had actually been a training on the bivvy bag system the Wednesday before Clark Harmon's death. The operations director told law enforcement that they'd started using the bivvy bag recently because it was considered the more comfortable scenario, and this person claimed that 2 people, field director number 6 and field director number 13, had developed the training for the bivvy. Quote, we got stuff from other programs and then worked the rest of it out on our own, end quote. The operations director also said that they did not think the parents of clients were explicitly told about the bivvy bag system for sleeping at night, and many parents of both former and current clients actually did state that they had no idea their child had been forced to sleep in one of these contraptions. They'd never been told this by anyone. The operations director also seemed to really take this whole thing very seriously, stating, quote, if a bivvy is a restrictive intervention, so is their sleeping bag, end quote. Is that true, dude? Is that true? Because a sleeping bag, you can, have your head out into the air. A bivy bag, once again, is like a mesh netting and plastic tarp coffin. The clinical director of Trails Carolina, who'd been working there in that role since July of 2015, claimed that field director number 6 had conducted the staff training for the bivy bag, and when asked if the clinical director, knew how the bivy worked, they responded, quote, "I haven't seen one in action. I have seen one at a local outdoor store," end quote. The primary therapist of Clark Harmon had been working in that role for almost 4 years, and they claimed that they didn't have enough information to speak on the bivy bag system. They said they knew the bivy had been used for several months and it was supposed to be a less restrictive method than the burrito, even with the alarm attached. The primary therapist said that to their knowledge, the student could unzip the bag if they wanted to, but it would cause the alarm to go off. And this person said something else that was interesting. I'm not sure how the conversation went down because, like I said, much of this is redacted, but I assume they were speaking about night checks and the potential for a staff member to stay awake all night when a student is sleeping in a bivy bag to make sure that the student's safe throughout the night. The primary therapist said that if a student's needs require staff to stay awake all night, they're not a good fit for the Trails Carolina program. And my response would be, if a student's needs require them to be placed in a prison the size of a coffin all night, wouldn't that be a sign that they might not be a good fit for your program and that they should be at home with their parents getting help from medical professionals more than once a week? Wouldn't that be a sign? Then the logistics coordinator claimed the training for the bivy bag system included how to set it up, system functions, the intentions for using it, etc., etc. But this person also said, quote, "Last I heard, we moved back to the old system with a tarp," end quote. Does anybody really know what the hell's going on here? And this is the logistics coordinator, the person responsible for logistics. Former field director number 6 admitted to training the trail staff on the burrito method, but denied personally having trained staff on the bivy, claiming it was field director number 13 who had run that training. Basically, what we get from all of this is a cluster. The lower staff members responsible for the day-to-day care of the clients seemed to have had some kind of basic training on the bivy bag, but not enough to know what to do if something went wrong. Like, for instance, many of these people said, if there's damage to the bivy bag, you're supposed to, get a new one. You're supposed to contact somebody that's higher than you and get a new bag. But they saw damage to the bivy bag, the hole in the netting, as well as the zipper falling off, which caused them to have to zip up that second layer. And nobody contacted anybody. Then we have upper management, the people responsible for dictating protocol and procedures at the facility, the people responsible for deciding to use the bivy bag on these juvenile clients to begin with, and they clearly have very little knowledge about the bivy bag system. The founder had, basically no knowledge about it. He's like, I don't know anything about this bivy bag. The clinical director had seen one once at a sporting goods store. The primary therapist didn't know shit about it, even though they're the ones responsible for deciding how long a client stays on AP and safety. In my opinion, every single person who worked at this facility should have gotten extensive multi-day trainings on this bivy bag system. And part of the requirement for being able to use this stupid coffin bag on another human being would be personal experience, meaning you all get to spend a night in that stupid bivy bag, zipped up with an alarm fastened to it, having to try and wake someone up if you have to get up at night and pee. And this was the conclusion of the Department of Health and Human Services as well. Their report stated that lead staff number 1, the FSC, and staff number 4 failed to provide supervision or consult with another supervisor during the night when things with Clark escalated. They failed to follow internal procedures for sleeping modification for students. They could not visually assess Clark because the outside of the bivy was closed due to the broken zipper on the inside mesh layer. Quote, clients served by this facility ranged in age from 10 to 17 years old. They had diagnoses including but not limited to major depressive disorder, ADHD, PTSD, parent-child relational problems, generalized anxiety disorder, autism spectrum disorders, and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Clients had histories of self-harm, physical aggression, and elopement. The facility implemented a level of supervision that required clients to be within arm's length of staff at all times, including during sleep times. The facility began using the Bivy system in the fall of 2023 for new admissions and for clients on the highest level of supervision, assigned proximity. Previously, the facility used a system known as the burrito or taco. If during the night a client needed to use the bathroom, they would have to ask staff to let them out of the sleeping system they were assigned to while on AP. Using the burrito or taco, staff were sleeping on top of a piece of plastic that was wrapped over/around the client's body. During the use of these systems, clients were not provided dignity or respect, as evidenced by having to sleep on the floor of the cabin with a thin sleeping pad surrounded by plastic that was tied at two ends, while the other clients in the same cabin were able to sleep on bunk beds with mattresses. The staff assigned to sleep within an arm's reach of the client also slept on a mattress instead of a thin sleeping pad. Also, at times, the complete outer shell was zipped up to fully enclose the client inside the Bivy. The facility failed to implement their own policies and protocols regarding increased sleeping precautions by not having same-sex staff sleep within arm's reach of clients at least 23 times between 11/18/23 and 12/28/23 with 5 different clients, end quote. Staff number 3, the person responsible for doing the night checks, had told the Department of Health and Human Services during his interview that he was trained to look physically or audibly for confirmation that a client was alive when doing night checks, and he said, quote, "I didn't check as thoroughly as I should have. My actions that night was to perform night checks. That was my responsibility, which I failed on. I do feel like the Bivy had a lot to do with the client passing away. Suffocation is always possible if equipment is being used wrong," end quote. And this is important. This is very important. Remember, this staff member says this to the DHHS long before the autopsy report came back. After Clark's death, the 4 staff members who'd been assigned to Cabin 6 were put on leave, and the police investigation began as the medical examiner got to work on the autopsy, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But first, we're going to discuss Trails Carolina's response to the information contained in the DHHS audit, and we're going to talk about their audacity. In a statement, Trails Carolina said, quote, "We believe the DHHS report of deficiencies is inaccurate and misleading in many respects, and we continue to work with state officials to clarify and correct where needed. In fact, just yesterday, April 23rd, 2024, we met with DHHS staff in person and walked them through basic camping lexicon and systems, which by their admission, they did not previously understand. Most importantly, the cause of death has yet to be released by the medical examiner, and in the meantime, statements by anyone beyond those with authority and direct access to the specifics of the autopsy are nothing more than speculation," end quote. This is the definition of dying on a hill. Because what are we doing here? What are we doing? There's no accountability. Cause of death, you say? Those with authority and direct access to the specifics of the autopsy, you say? Speculation, you say? Well, I happen to have the autopsy report right here. So I guess I'm allowed to speak on it because I've got the specifics. The autopsy report states that the cause of death for 12-year-old Clark Harmon, who died just 6 days before his 13th birthday on February 9th, by the way, his cause of death was asphyxia due to smothering, and the manner of death is listed as homicide. The report also states that Clark had swelling of the brain and mild bruising on his left thigh and leg without significant internal injuries. The report talks about how Clark was checked on throughout the night, but due to the outer opaque layer of the bags being closed, he couldn't be seen. Quote, "It should be noted that a common warning on commercially available Bivy products indicates that the outer weather-resistant opening should not be fully secured, as it may lead to condensation and breathing restriction. This information was obtained on a basic web search," end quote. And I think that the staff at Trails Carolina knew that because the staff member who's doing the night checks said suffocation is always a possibility if the bags aren't used correctly. The report goes on to say, asphyxia due to smothering refers to death due to the inability to breathe in oxygen. In this case, due to covering the nose and mouth with a non-breathable material. It is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning all other reasonable causes of death must be excluded and there needs to be sufficient evidence to support the asphyxia event occurred. Autopsy examination revealed no natural disease which could explain death. Toxicology testing also revealed no toxic levels of his prescription medications, over-the-counter medications, or common drugs of abuse. Therefore, all common natural and toxic causes of death were reasonably excluded. According to investigation, the decedent, Clark, was inside the bivvy but oriented opposite to the intended use, which would have allowed the waterproof material to fall onto his head and face. The outer waterproof opening was fully secured and closed with an audible alarm which could not be opened by the decedent, and the entire bivvy was also partially surrounded by a thick plastic sheet canoe under and on the sides of the bivvy. These support restriction of breathing due to these external factors. It is unclear if elevated temperature, hypothermia, may have also played a role in death since he was partially undressed, and the way the sleeping area was constructed could have resulted in increased environmental temperature. He was placed into this compromised sleeping area by others and did not have the ability to reasonably remove himself from the situation with the alarm securing the opening. The standard protocol was deviated from due to using a damaged bivvy and securing the outer weather-resistant door instead of the inner mesh panel. Lastly, the counselors could not check on him as they should due to the opaque nature of this outer panel, preventing them from potentially noting the problem and delivering aid before he died. With this combination of factors, the death is best certified as homicide. And I did read some reporting that Clark removing his clothes when he was sleeping seemed to be a common thing he did at home, so there doesn't appear to be a nefarious aspect to the removal of his pants and underwear, which, remember, were found by his head. Now, if his head was found where his feet should have been, was he using the pants and underwear as a pillow, or had he removed them while he was in the bivvy bag, like kind of like wriggled out of them and then somehow turned himself around in the bivvy bag? Or, because standard protocol said that these clients should be put to sleep when they're in the bivvy bag with their head against the wall of the cabin and their feet pointing out toward the bunks. And we know, or according to the staff that put Clark in the bivvy bag, Clark was put to bed in that bivvy bag with his head facing the bunks, the other bunk beds, and his feet facing the wall. So did they just put him in the bag wrong? Like, did they put his head in the place where his feet should have gone, where that like waterproof layer was most prominent? I don't know. I don't know, and I don't think they do either, because they weren't properly trained to use this bivvy bag in a safe way. I don't think the bivvy bag should be used at all in any way, shape, or form with these kids, especially given the fact that many of these kids have mental health issues. We know that Clark had anxiety issues. Some of these kids are on the autism spectrum. And I know that a lot of you out there who listen and watch me, you have children who are on the spectrum. And imagine your child who's been diagnosed with autism being put to sleep in this bag coffin thing. How would they react to that? How would they react? I mean, my daughter is 7 and I have an almost 13-year-old son. Neither one of them would be okay with this. And they don't have autism. To my knowledge, they don't have any severe mental health issues. And they still wouldn't be comfortable with it. And it would still cause an elevated level of anxiety. So in my opinion, it's not really the truth that the Trails Carolina was interested in. They weren't worried about the autopsy report. They're still denying any responsibility, even when the facts are laid out in front of them and us and everyone. They're still trying to do damage control and clutch their pearls and act like the victims when a 12-year-old boy is dead and he was in their care when he died. In a letter from Trails Carolina, the facility claimed that the state's actions are without reasonable or sufficient basis, and they're detrimental to the health or safety of the children who would otherwise be in the care of Trails Carolina. Like, these people are literally saying, you're hurting kids by closing us down. You're causing pain and trauma, and you know, you're not helping these kids by not allowing them to come to our facility. The kid died at your facility. Has the Department of Health and Human Services killed any kids lately? Or just you guys? They said, quote, the state's actions and decision-making did not appropriately consider the degree of sanctions necessary to assure compliance. And the state, quote, exceeded its authority, acted erroneously, failed to use proper procedure, and acted arbitrarily and capriciously in its investigation and suspension of admissions, end quote. Okay, guys, we get it. You have a word-a-day calendar. You got great vocabulary. All right, you just threw a bunch of big words in there. And basically the whole gist of it was, you guys shouldn't be able to tell us what to do. We're helping kids and families. We're helping kids and families. It doesn't matter how many times you say that. Did you help this kid? Did you help this kid's family? If you failed even one kid, and as we know, Trails Carolina has failed multiple kids. If you failed even one, don't you think you might take some time to reflect on this, revamp some procedures, find a better way to help kids that doesn't end with them being suffocated in some coffin bag? We'll see where this goes, but the state of North Carolina seems dead set on not allowing Trails Carolina to regain their license, and I think that's the best call, because it appears that this whole industry is toxic, and the people behind it are more interested with filling their pockets than making the lives of their clients better. Trails Carolina is owned by a parent company called Family Health and Wellness, which also runs at least 7 programs in Utah, which I don't know if you're surprised by this, but Utah is the worst state for this troubled teen industry. They have so many facilities and they have so many issues with the facilities. In 2022, 14-year-old Sophia Soto died at Maple Lake Academy in Spanish Fork, and her parents claimed in a lawsuit that it was due to staff negligence. That same year, at Diamond Ranch Academy in Hurricane, 17-year-old Taylor Goodridge was denied medical treatment, and he died of sepsis. Catherine Kubler, the person behind the 2024 Netflix series The Program, which talks about these teen residential programs, she said, quote, "These programs are like whack-a-mole. When one gets shut down, a new one opens under a different name," end quote. So Maple Lake Academy is still open, but the Utah Department of Health and Human Services did not renew the license of Diamond Ranch. But according to Salt Lake Magazine, a similar program, under a different name, is already trying to take Diamond Ranch's place. And they're seeking a license to operate using the same staff that Diamond Ranch used at the same facility that Diamond Ranch used. So basically, it's just Diamond Ranch under a different name. And they're like, yeah, we killed a kid, and we got in trouble, and we couldn't get our license back, but let us try again. Give us a second chance. A 2024 lawsuit filed by 18-year-old Finn Richardson claims that this place called Elevations in Syracuse, New York, which is also a family health and wellness-owned facility, cared more about getting money from his father than it cared about his well-being. When Richardson told his therapist at Elevations that he had been sexually abused by his father and then sent away to this facility as a punishment for being gay, the facility failed to report the alleged abuse, and then a court-appointed psychiatric evaluation determined that Richardson never even needed treatment in the first place, and more time at Elevations would have been, quote, detrimental to his psychological, emotional, social, and academic well-being, end quote. So basically, it looks like some, I'm not going to say all of these facilities because that's a broad generalization and I don't have the evidence to back that up, but some of these facilities are just taking kids in for the paycheck, and they're not properly actually like analyzing them to make sure that they even need the level of psychological help that these residential teen programs offer. There have also been allegations that Family Health and Wellness uses false advertisement. They pay for reputation management companies to give them false Google reviews from persons potentially in other countries who are posing as parents, which might have something to do with all the positive reviews about Trails Carolina. Allegedly, don't come for me, I'm just saying. But at this point, to me, it looks like the only thing that can and should be done is have all these programs shut down without delay, because they seem to accomplish just 2 things. These programs make the people who are running them rich, and it also seems to be a way for some of these parents to unload their kids on somebody else, a way to get rid of their problem children, even if just for a short time, make their kids someone else's problem. It seems like the only people that these facilities are actually not helping, not serving, are the juveniles themselves, the ones who actually need the most help and support, the ones that both these facilities and the parents claim and shout to anybody who will listen that they're helping. It's hard work, but someone's got to do it. Somebody's got to be there for these kids. Let me know what you think about all of this, and if you agree with me that the troubled teen industry has just become too large, too greedy, and too unregulated to function effectively or safely. Or do you think there is a potential benefit to these programs? Do you think there might be a way to fix them so that they can do what they're supposed to do, which is help kids who are going through a really rough time? Let me know. I would really be interested in your take on this. But before we go, let's talk about Stephanie's Small Business Showcase. And today's small business comes to us from Bree, owner of Vinyl Daisy Shop. So Bree says that she opened her shop in mid-2020 after desperately needing a creative outlet, much like so many others during this time. From the day that I opened, I made a promise to myself that I would only make things I love. I didn't want to turn this thing that nurtures my creativity into a job or a chore by making things just because they'd make me money, which I love, Brie. I just wanted to put things out into the world that brought me joy to make, even if that meant listing a completely unhinged rainbow sticker that says, "Lobotomize me, Daddy." To my surprise, my people found me, and the rest is history. Now, after just recently celebrating 4 years of business, I'm sitting at nearly 14,000 sales on Etsy. I've launched my own website, gone viral on Reddit, and I've partnered with several local animal rescues to do decal fundraisers. Unfortunately, I still haven't mastered the whole social media thing, though, maybe within the next 4. Vinyl Daisy Shop is inspired by a love of animals, the magic found within pages of a great book, all things spooky, the kindness in people, all of the joys and struggles of parenthood, and the inability to not use sarcasm like punctuation. I love your channel and Crime Weekly, and I'm so inspired by all the positivity and good that you and Derek, can't forget Derek, bring to the true crime space. I also love that you're using your platform to support small businesses. I think I can likely speak for all small business owners when I say that truly means a lot. I'd be thrilled to send over some stickers if you find any that you need to slap on a water bottle, notebook, or tablet. Or laptop. So Brie sells stickers and vinyl decals and things like that, and they're really funny. Actually, they're like really funny. A lot of these decals are for like the back of your car, you know, when you're like driving behind someone and they have something funny on the back window of their car. So they say things like childless cat lady for president, I love curbs, which is like way too accurate for me. Less people, more dogs. Please don't honk at me. I'm doing my best. Also very relevant to me. She has a decal for your car that says female owned and operated, which I love. There's one that says hot girls hit curbs. There's one that says it was never a phase. One that says internally screaming in like a really cute font and in parentheses. She has all sorts of very cool stickers. Some of them are holographic. Like there's a holographic sticker of a ghost holding a cat. There's a sticker that's got stars and it says you tried. Oh, so true. There's mushroom stickers and bumblebee stickers. There's a holographic heart sticker. It's silver and it says, I don't care what the Bible says. There's a sticker that looks like a membership card and it says late night reading club. There's one that says surviving purely out of spite. These are great. They're great. They're really, really pretty. The Lobotomize Me Daddy one, it's like a rainbow and it looks holographic and I kind of want it. Actually, I kind of want that as a decal for my car. I don't know why. Antisocial book club. I am not the one and there's a frog. These are great. I love them. So go check out Brie's stickers and details at Vinyl Daisy Shop. I'm going to link her Etsy shop in the description box. I'm really proud of you, Brie. I'm proud of you for staying true to yourself. I'm proud of you for creating a very popular business out of something that you're passionate about. I'm proud that you've gone viral. I'm proud that something you poured your heart and soul into paid off for you, and I want to support you, and I know that everybody who's watching would love to support you as well. So go check her out. Link is in the description box. Other than that, don't forget to let me know what you think about Trails Carolina and these 2 videos in the comment section. Like the video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay safe. Because I don't want anything to happen to you. Bye.